Roosevelt did not even break off diplomatic relations with Germany. Once again, there had been rhetoric, but no move to war. Churchill had to accept that dragging in America had failed. And Roosevelt's elusive behavior over the previous 18 months begged the question of what game he had been playing all along. The president himself kept his cards so close to his chest that he never told a single soul, relative, crony or colleague, whether at any stage he'd intended to fulfill Churchill's hopes and bring America into the war against Hitler. But it is possible to piece together the mental jigsaw.
We will extend to the opponents of force.
Roosevelt used words and promises, some of them misleading or exaggerated, to boost Churchill's resolve to fight on.
The President has sent me here to tell you that at all costs and by all means he will carry you through.
He used American money and industrial muscle to finance and equip Britain and then Russia.
We must be the great arsenal of democracy.
And he was willing to use the American Navy and Air Force to defend the Atlantic. What this added up to was one of the most brilliantly self-interested political strategies of all time. Roosevelt was defending America and opposing Hitler, his two core aims, at almost no cost to American lives. And, at the same time, he ignited a massive increase in arms production, which finally brought the United States out of economic depression. The extent to which Roosevelt deliberately intended all this, or whether it was the result of his bobbing and weaving in the face of events, will always remain unclear. As for the one thing Churchill wanted above all, an American declaration of war, of that, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests Roosevelt never had the slightest intention. Churchill's great hope had been an illusion. Even Lend-Lease had made practically no difference. It only provided 1% of Britain's weapons in its lonely year of 1991. Then, on December the 7th, the Japanese Navy attacked Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt was brutally hurled into war.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Even now, Roosevelt did not ask Congress to declare war against Japan's ally, Germany. As it turned out, he was saved the choice. 4 days later, Hitler declared war on the United States. Churchill's relationship with Roosevelt was about to be transformed. For Churchill, it would be a double-edged blessing. After Pearl Harbor, Churchill sailed immediately to Washington to be at the side of his new fighting ally. Events had liberated their relationship. Churchill calculated that physical closeness was the way to cement it. Sometimes, as the British ambassador to Washington, Lord Halifax, observed, to the point of Churchillian eccentricity.
January the 4th, 1942. Winston has been working like a beaver here and doing a grand job. He's got on to the most intimate terms with the President, who visits him in his bedroom at any hour, and, as Winston says, is the only head of state whom he, Winston, has ever received in the nude. Apart from all other merits, what a wonderful showman he is.
Roosevelt could at last humor Churchill's attempts at seduction. At the end of his visit, he told him,
"It is fun to be in the same decade with you."
But beneath the smiles, those close to Roosevelt, like his Labor Secretary, Francis Perkins, noticed a new steel in his soul.
He was a changed, more potent and dedicated personality. He was different. The terrible shock of Pearl Harbor, The destruction of his precious ships, the unknown hazards which war might bring to the people, acted like a spiritual purge and left him cleaner, simpler, more single-minded.
This change in Roosevelt would have a vital impact on his relationship with Churchill. (1942), a year when the war was still going badly, was their honeymoon period. But it couldn't and wouldn't last. In the end, Churchill lost his duel with Roosevelt. He failed to persuade him to bring America into the war. Japan and Hitler did that. What this meant was that Roosevelt was not fighting Churchill's war, but his own, and the two men had very different long-term objectives. Beyond the defeat of Hitler, Churchill wanted above all to preserve the British Empire, which was an anathema to Roosevelt, and it was over empire that they had their first real argument. In the spring of 1942, Churchill had allowed negotiations to go ahead with Indian nationalists, mainly to ensure India's loyalty in the war. When the talks broke down, Roosevelt blamed Churchill.
The feeling is almost universally held here that the deadlock has been caused by the unwillingness of the British government to concede to the Indians the right of self-government. I feel I must place this issue before you very frankly, and I know you will understand my reasons for so doing.
Churchill was enraged by what he saw as Roosevelt's meddling. According to one witness, the string of cuss words lasted 2 hours into the night. He drafted a furious reply.
I am greatly concerned to receive your message, because I am sure that I could not be responsible for a policy which would throw the whole subcontinent of India into utter confusion while the Japanese invader is at its gates.
In the end, Churchill sat on the message, but he let Roosevelt know that he would resign over India if he was pushed too far. And there was a second gulf between them. Britain had gone to war for the freedom of Europe, specifically the independence of Poland. But as 1942 wore on, Churchill was beginning to see a new threat to Europe. The man who'd become the third ally in the fight against Hitler, Joseph Stalin. He told his Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden,
It would be a measureless disaster if Russian barbarism overlaid the ancient states of Europe.
Roosevelt saw it very differently. As far as he was concerned, the cause of the war in the first place was the infighting between Europe's ancient imperialist nations. And he began to see in Stalin someone who would help him rid the world of that imperialism. Also in 1942, he remarked,
The European people will simply have to endure Russian domination in the hope that in 10 or 20 years, the European influence will bring the Russians to become less barbarous.
These opposing views held the seeds of increasingly bitter disagreements. The third duel of the Warlords would be between Churchill and Stalin. At stake was the future liberty of Europe. The casualty of that duel would be the trust Churchill had worked so hard to build with his new friend across the Atlantic.
The Holocaust, an event in history so shocking no one can be ignorant of it. But there are many untold stories